There is a specific way that large creatures look when they have stopped eating. It is not dramatic, at first. They do not collapse. They do not make sounds of distress. They simply begin to conserve. The eyes stay open. The body stays still. The breathing becomes slower and more deliberate, the rhythm of something that has decided to spend less. The stillness deepens by degrees. The way a fire burns lower not all at once but gradually. The way it gives you time to notice before it goes out. Sorath had not eaten in 14 days. The council knew. They had known since the 9th day, when the kitchen records showed no food removed from the imperial dragon's chambers since the beginning of the month. They had sent for the imperial physician, who had assessed Sorath from a safe and respectful distance, and reported that the emperor appeared physically stable but disengaged. The physician used the word disengaged, with the careful emphasis of someone using a clinical term to avoid a more alarming one. What the physician meant was, the emperor appears to have stopped caring whether he continues. 14 days. Sorath had maintained governance throughout. The council brought paperwork, and Sorath reviewed it. He issued decisions. He signed documents. He did not make errors. He had, in fact, been governing with the same precision he had maintained for 15 years, ever since he had shifted to dragon form at his father's death, and never shifted back. The governance was intact. The emperor behind it was not. This is the thing about long endurance. It looks the same from the outside, long after it has stopped being what it was from the inside. Sorath had been functioning for 15 years. He had been sustaining for the last several months of those 15 years. And the fast was not a decision in the way decisions are normally made. It was more like a consequence. When the body's will to continue is low enough, the hunger goes with it. The hunger had been the last thing keeping him oriented. When it left, there was very little that remained. The council had watched this unfolding the way people watch something they are not sure they are allowed to name. They had tried the obvious approaches. More food, prepared differently. The physician's assessment. A visiting counselor who sat with Sorath for an hour and made cheerful conversation, and was gently and completely ignored. They had tried these things, and the emperor had continued to govern, and continued not to eat, and the two facts had sat in the council chamber like a problem that none of the standard solutions would reach. The council, in the way of councils that have survived 20 years of an unusual emperor, decided to send for help. Sorath had not been human in 15 years. He had shifted on the morning his father died. He had been in the garden with the news, standing on the stone path between the winter roses, and he had shifted without deciding to, the way a person sometimes cries before they know they are going to. The shift had come up through him and out of him, and then he was in dragon form, and the garden was too small for him, and he had gone to the chambers that could hold him. He had told himself he would shift back when he had processed the grief. He had told himself this was temporary. He had told himself many things over the following weeks that had all turned out to be incorrect. The problem was not that the grief would not process. The problem was that processing grief, when you are an emperor, and everyone around you needs you to be functional, requires a kind of privacy that is very difficult to maintain in human form. In dragon form, he was separated by size and scale from the ordinary reaching that people do. The small touchings of hands on shoulders, the close conversations, the thousand small negotiations of emotional proximity. In dragon form, he was large and present and not accessible. He governed from inside that inaccessibility, and the empire functioned, and he had never found the right moment to stop. 15 years is a long time to be inside a form you chose for shelter. The shelter had done its work. He was no longer broken by his father's death. He had, in fact, been not broken for some years. What he had not done was find a way back. The dragon form had been a door he went through to survive, and he had never found the handle on the other side. He had thought about shifting back many times. He had thought about it particularly on the anniversaries of his father's death, when the palace observed the day with a quiet ceremony that the council attended, and that Sorath watched from his chambers. He had thought, "This is the day I will shift back." He had thought this for 15 years, and had not shifted back on any of them. Not because he did not want to, exactly, because the cost of returning to a form that required ordinary human vulnerability, the small touchings and conversations and emotional negotiations that human form invited, had always seemed higher than the cost of remaining where he was. The fast was not grief. The fast was exhaustion. There is a difference, and it matters. Grief has an object. Exhaustion, after 15 years of the same day repeating in the same form, in the same chambers, is a different thing. It is the specific tiredness of a life that has been very long, and very sustained, and very unchanged. The council was afraid. Sorath understood this. He had made sure, during the fast, to continue making decisions, to continue reviewing documents, to give the council as little reason for visible alarm as possible. He was being considerate. He was also, and he was aware of this, being very tired. Lyra was 31 years old and had been keeping wounded birds since she was 17, not as a hobby, as a practice. She had a house at the edge of the city's medical quarter where she lived with several birds at any given time. Birds with broken wings that would not heal cleanly. Birds with injuries that made flight impossible for months. Birds that had been found on the street by people who did not know what to do with them, and who had ended up, somehow, at Lyra's door. She did not advertise. She did not have to. She had a reputation for being the person you brought a broken thing to when you did not know what else to do. She understood broken things in the way that precision understands its subject, not through sentiment, but through careful observation and specific action. She knew that broken things required specific conditions, warmth, but not too much, food in small amounts and at regular intervals, not in large amounts at whatever time was convenient, quiet, predictability, the knowledge that the environment would not change without warning. She had been dismissed from the Imperial Physicians' Hall 4 years before the story begins. The reason was an argument with the head physician about a patient named Wren, a woman in her 40s with a chest infection that the head physician had diagnosed as mild and treatable with standard compounds. Lyra had examined the patient, reviewed the case, and told the head physician directly that the diagnosis was incorrect and that the treatment he had prescribed would not address what she was seeing. The head physician had asked her to defer to his seniority and experience. Lyra had asked him to look again at the patient's breathing pattern. The head physician had declined. Wren died 6 days later, following the head physician's treatment. Wren was buried on a Thursday. Lyra attended the burial. She did not speak to the head physician again after the dismissal meeting. What she carried from the experience was not bitterness, exactly. She was too precise for bitterness, which requires a certain unfocused energy she had never been able to sustain. What she carried was the specific knowledge of what it meant to see something clearly and have no institutional mechanism by which to act on what she saw. To be right and to be insufficient, not because of any failure of her own reasoning, but because the structure she was inside did not permit her reasoning to reach the outcome it required. Lyra was dismissed for insubordination. She had not, in 4 years since, been readmitted to the physician's hall. What she had done was continue practicing, in a smaller way, with the resources available to her outside the hall's walls. She had also continued being correct, in the specific way of a person who is right about things, in circumstances where being right has no institutional power behind it. When the council's courier arrived at her door and asked whether she would accept a 12-month posting as specialist in the Imperial Dragon's chambers, she had looked at the courier for a long moment and said, "What specifically is wrong with the dragon?" The courier had been told to say that the Emperor was experiencing an extended period of diminished appetite. Lyra had looked at the courier with the look she used when she suspected the clinical language was being used to soften something harder. "How long?" she said. 14 days, the courier said. "I will come," Lyra said. She was already reaching for her case. She was briefed on the journey to the palace by a council aide named Tomas, who was thorough and clearly relieved to be briefing someone who asked specific questions, rather than reacting to the information emotionally. Lyra asked, duration of the fast, previous attempts to address it, what had been offered and when, whether the Emperor had been sleeping, whether there were any changes in his behavior outside the eating, whether the council had any theories about the cause. Tomas answered all of these. 14 days. The kitchen had tried twice to bring larger portions. The Emperor's personal attendant had tried sitting near the food and waiting. No changes in governance behavior, no visible change in physical presentation beyond what the physician had noted. The council had no specific theories, though they had several anxious ones that Tomas described only in outline. He is still governing, Lyra said. Yes, Tomas said. Completely? No deferred decisions? No extended response times? Completely, Tomas confirmed. If you read only the administrative record, nothing has changed. Lyra nodded. She looked out the carriage window at the city passing. When a creature stops eating but continues to function, she said, it has usually made a decision, not about dying, about what it is willing to spend energy on. She paused. Governance is not the same as living. It is possible to do one and not the other. Tomas did not have a response to this. I am not going to bring large quantities of food, Lyra said. I am not going to try to make eating feel urgent or significant. I am going to do what I do with the birds. She looked at Tomas. I am going to make it possible, and I am going to wait. Tomas said, the council was hoping for something faster. Lyra said, I know. That is not a factor. The dragon's chambers were large, well lit, and had been arranged with care by people who had been trying for 15 years to make a dragon's environment comfortable. The food bowls were the correct size. The bedding was the correct composition. The temperature was maintained with precision. Sorath lay in the far corner and did not look at Lyra when she entered. She had been warned, by Tomas and by the attendant who opened the chamber door, that Sorath had not looked at anyone directly in several days. They had used this as information about his condition. Lyra used it as information about his state of attention. He was not interested in what entered the room. This was a data point. She did not approach him. She set her case on the floor near the entrance, took out a small bowl, and placed in it a portion of food smaller than anything the kitchen had been bringing. A piece of dried fish, 2 small cubes of soft meat, a dried fig. She set the bowl on the floor midway between herself and Sorath. She sat down on the floor. She brought out the notebook she was currently using for the birds at home, the small leather-bound record where she tracked feeding schedules and healing progress. She opened it to a blank page and began to add observations. Date, chamber temperature, emperor's position, quality of light. She wrote in detail, with the precision of someone who did not know yet which details would matter, and so recorded all of them. She did not speak to Sorath. She did not look at him repeatedly. She looked at him once at the start, thoroughly enough to establish his current state, and then she turned her attention to her notebook and did not redirect it. After an hour, she picked up the bowl, set it near the wall where Sorath could reach it easily without it being presented to him as an expectation, and left. She came back the next morning. Sorath had not touched the food. She noted this in her record without inflection. She noted also that he had moved slightly during the night. He was not in exactly the position he had been in when she left. He had adjusted his weight, shifted the angle of his head by a few degrees, small things, but she recorded them because small things were where she had always found the information that mattered. She set a fresh bowl in the same position. She sat down on the floor. She opened her notebook and wrote. She wrote about the temperature of the chamber, and the quality of the light, and the way Sorath's breathing was slower today than it had been yesterday. She wrote, he is watching me without appearing to watch me. She wrote, this is something. On the third morning, Lyra came without food. The attendant, when she passed him at the door, looked at her empty hands with visible concern. Lyra said, no food today, just me. She went in before the attendant could decide how to respond. She sat in the same position she had occupied for the first 2 mornings. She opened her notebook, but today she did not write in it. She read what she had already written, going back through her notes from the morning she had arrived, and reviewing each observation in sequence. Sorath, in the far corner, had moved slightly. He was not in exactly the position he had been in yesterday. He had adjusted his weight during the night. This was a small thing, but small things accumulated. Lyra read her notes and did not make new ones. She was thinking about Rumi, who had written that the wound is the place where the light enters you, not as comfort but as a statement about mechanics. A wound creates an opening. Openings are where things get in. You cannot protect a wound from light by sealing it. You can only keep the wound from becoming something that light no longer reaches. She was thinking about what it meant for a creature to have been sealed for 15 years. Not wounded, exactly. Sustained. The difference between a wound and a sustained state is that a wound has a before. Sorath had been in sustained dragon form for longer than the grief had been active. The grief was not the current condition. The current condition was something that had grown up in the space where the grief used to be. She looked at him. He was looking at her. Not at the door. Not at the air above her. At her. She looked back. She did not smile, because she was not performing comfort. She simply looked at him with the attention she used when she was trying to understand what a thing needed. The specific attention of someone who is listening to what is not being said. After a moment, she went back to her reading. She read for another 20 minutes. During those 20 minutes, she counted 3 separate instances of Sorath adjusting his attention in her direction before redirecting it. Each adjustment was small. Each one was the movement of a creature that is trying to observe something without appearing to be observing it. She had seen this with the birds. It was what animals did when they were deciding whether something was safe enough to approach, testing the environment by increments, gathering information in a way that could be stopped at any point without cost. On the 4th morning, Lyra brought a small bird. It was a starling with a wing that had not fully healed, a bird she was currently managing for another 6 weeks of restricted movement. She carried it in a cloth-lined box with a latched lid, which she set on the floor beside her when she sat down. The bird was visible through the ventilation slats. She had not been certain this was the right choice. She had thought about it during the night, lying awake in her chamber, reviewing what she knew about Sorath's current state, and what she knew about the patterns of recovery in creatures that had been sustained, rather than acutely ill. The thing she kept returning to was the quality of what was present in his environment. Everything in the dragon's chambers had been placed with intention. The food bowls were the best available, and they said so. The bedding was the most appropriate composition, and it communicated this. Even the space itself had been arranged to honor and accommodate him. Everything was deliberate. Everything was for him. And somewhere in 15 years of everything being for him, he had lost the experience of things that were simply themselves. But she had concluded that what was absent from the Emperor's current environment was not food or medical attention or conversation. Those had all been provided and had all been insufficient. What was absent was something that did not ask anything of him in return for its presence. The bird did not know what Sorath was. The bird did not know it was in the chambers of the Dragon Emperor of the realm. The bird was sitting in its box being a bird, which was what it was, which was all it was. Sorath had looked at the box when Lyra came in. He had not looked at anything she brought in before, except with the peripheral acknowledgement of a creature that has noted something's entry without deciding to engage with it. He looked at the box more directly. Lyra sat down. She unlatched one side of the box lid and let it open slightly, not enough to allow the bird to exit, but enough to allow the sounds to carry. The starling moved around inside the box, making the small sounds of a bird that is comfortable in its space. Sorath's head moved, by a few inches, toward the sound. Lyra noted this. She kept the box beside her and wrote nothing for a long time. She watched the dragon and the bird attend to each other across the distance between them. The bird made sounds. The dragon listened. The dragon breathed. Slowly, with a different quality than the breathing Lyra had been tracking for 4 days. She thought, "I think you are very tired of nothing in this room having its own weight." She thought, "I think everything here has been arranged for you, and nothing here is simply itself." On the 5th morning, Lyra came with the bird and a small bowl of food. She placed the bowl in the same position she had used before, equidistant between herself and Sorath, close enough to the wall to not feel like a presentation. She opened the bird's box slightly. She sat down. The bird was in fine form. It had eaten well the previous evening and was communicative about this. It moved around its box and made several specific observations about the quality of the morning air. Sorath watched the box. Lyra opened her notebook. She wrote, "5th morning. Dragon is attending to the bird. Position has changed from yesterday. He has moved forward." She looked up and calculated the distance and wrote it down. She wrote, "I think today." She held the bowl of food in her hands rather than placing it on the floor. She did not hold it out toward Sorath. She simply held it in her lap, as she sometimes held food for the birds at home, while they decided whether they were ready to come to her. She waited. Rumi wrote that the wound is the place where the light enters. This is not a comfortable image when you are sitting in a dragon's chamber waiting to see whether the emperor is going to decide that eating is worth doing. It is, however, an accurate one. Something has to be open for anything to get in. Sorath had been very carefully sealed for a long time, and sealing takes energy, and eventually the energy of sealing costs more than the risk of being open. Sorath moved. He moved slowly, with the care of something that has been still for a long time, and is not sure yet how its body will respond to motion. He moved toward Lyra in increments, pausing between them, and then he was close. Much closer than Lyra had expected today. Close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his scales. She raised the bowl, not toward him, just lifted it slightly from her lap, in the way of someone adjusting their grip. She looked down at the bowl, and not at Sorath, because she had learned with the birds that direct attention at the moment of approach was often the thing that stopped the approach. Sorath lowered his head. He took the piece of dried fish from the bowl, with a precision that was remarkably careful given his size, and he ate it. Lyra kept looking at the bowl. She breathed slowly. She did not react. She had learned with the birds that the moment of first contact required stillness from the person receiving it, not because the animal needed performance, but because any reaction at all, even a positive one, changed the quality of the moment from something natural into something witnessed. She did not want Sorath to feel witnessed. She wanted him to feel that eating from her hand was ordinary, a thing that could simply happen without consequence. She thought, the wound is the place where the light enters you. She thought this not as a comfort, but as an observation about mechanics. Something had to give way. Something had to stop being sealed. She held the bowl steady for another 10 minutes. Sorath ate everything in it. Then he raised his head and looked at her, directly, with the gold-green eyes that she had not seen at close range before, and she looked back at him, and they held each other's attention for a long, quiet moment. "Good morning," she said, simply, as she said it to the birds. The council aide Tomas came to find Lyra at mid-morning. He came because the attendant had reported, in a state of barely suppressed amazement, that the emperor had eaten, not a small amount, not symbolically, the full contents of a bowl, taken from the hands of the new specialist, in the manner of an emperor who had made a decision about things. Tomas found Lyra in the corridor outside the dragon's chambers. She was writing in her notebook. The bird in the box beside her was conducting its own mourning. "He ate," Tomas said. "Yes," Lyra said. She kept writing. "The council is significantly relieved," Tomas said. "They were asking me to inquire as to your assessment, whether this represents a sustained change or an isolated event." Lyra looked up from her notebook. "I cannot tell you that yet. I can tell you that he ate from my hand today, which means the aversion has lowered. Whether it stays low depends on whether the conditions that produced the aversion change." She paused. "He is not sick. He is exhausted. Exhaustion recovers differently than illness." Tomas nodded. "What does he need?" Lyra thought about this seriously, the way she thought about all serious questions. "He needs things in his environment that are simply themselves," she said. "Not arranged for him, not positioned to communicate anything, not performing purpose, just present, with their own weight." Tomas looked at the bird in the box. He seemed to be understanding something that was slightly different from what he had been expecting to understand. "The council would like to know how long the recovery will take," he said. "Tell the council," Lyra said, returning to her notebook, "that I will tell them when I know." 3 weeks after the first morning, Sorath shifted to human form. He had not done so in 15 years. He did it on a Tuesday afternoon, in the dragon's chambers, with Lyra sitting on the floor writing her notes, and the bird conducting its own affairs beside her. There was no announcement. There was the quiet that preceded shifts in this form, and then there was a man sitting on the floor across from her. He was older than she had pictured, in the abstract way she had pictured him. Lean, tired in the face, though not in the eyes, which were the same gold-green they had been in dragon form. He was wearing, she noticed, the plain gray clothes that were kept in the chambers for this possibility. He looked at Lyra. Lyra looked at him. "I was not sure I would do that again," he said. His voice was slightly rough from disuse. Not 15 years of disuse, from this morning's disuse, which was all the dragon form entailed in terms of speaking, but it was careful and clear. Lyra set her notebook down. "You do not have to stay in it," she said. "If it is easier to shift back, shift back." "It is not easier," he said. "I simply have not had a reason. In some time." She looked at him. She was doing what she did, assessing without performing assessment, looking for what was true about the thing in front of her rather than what she had expected to see. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He waited. "The birds I work with," she said, "when they stop eating, it is usually because the environment does not feel safe enough to be vulnerable. Eating requires letting your guard down, even for a bird, even for a few minutes. You cannot eat and remain fully watchful at the same time." She paused. "I have been thinking about your fast, and I think it was not about food. I think it was about what eating requires." Sorath was quiet for a moment. He had the expression of someone hearing something described accurately that they had not previously found words for. 15 years, Lyra said, is a long time to stay watchful. "Yes," he said. She picked her notebook back up. "The bird's name is Moat," she said. "I will be keeping it for another 5 weeks. After that, it will be released." She looked at the box. "You are welcome to continue attending to it in the meantime. It appears to be good for you both." Sorath looked at the bird. "Moat," he said. "She named herself," Lyra said. "The sound she makes is moat. So." There was a silence in the chamber that was different from the silences that had preceded it. A silence that had something breathing inside it, rather than something being sealed away. "The council will expect me to continue governing," Sorath said. "You can govern and also eat," Lyra said. "These are not contradictory." Sorath looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, the way the quality of light shifts in the late afternoon, when it becomes something different from what it was in the morning, without any single moment of transition. "I would like you to stay," he said, "if you are willing to." Lyra looked at him. She thought about her house at the edge of the medical quarter, and the birds, and the physician's hall where she was not permitted. She thought about the botanical resources available to her here. She thought about the 14 days of notes in her notebook, and what they had told her about what was possible when you stayed with a thing long enough to understand what it actually needed. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me them," he said. She told him.